Good afternoon. The Lightning struck late, and tonight the Stars and the Golden Knights will try to strike for the lead in their series. It's Thursday afternoon, and this is the hockeydebates.com podcast powered by sportsbettingdime.com. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bob Duff, joined as always by my esteemed co-host, the Hall of Fame hockey writer Kevin Allen. And today, as always, our guest on Thursday is Sascha Paruk from sportsbettingdime.com. He's the lead analyst and odds expert at SBD, and with a specific knowledge of hockey betting, and that's what we're going to discuss today. And we'll start right off with a change at the top. We discussed this briefly on Tuesday, Kevin, but Sascha, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning now at minus 115 as the odds-on favorite. Not just the fact that they've moved into the top spot, but to be getting negative odds on them now. They've obviously moved a lot of money and a lot of minds, and with their start to the conference finals against the Islanders.
Yeah, part of the reason that you're seeing them as an odds-on favorite right now, so that's shorter than plus 100, is because the Golden Knights are seemingly in a battle with the Dallas Stars. So what you're going to see if Vegas takes the lead tonight, if they go up 2-1 on Dallas, you're actually going to see Tampa Bay's odds come back, and I would expect them to be no shorter than plus 100 if Vegas goes up 2-1, because basically oddsmakers will then be anticipating a Tampa Bay Vegas final. And if that's the case, it's going to be a pick 'em at best for the Lightning. I wouldn't be surprised if Vegas goes in as the favorite.
So if you're thinking of betting on the Lightning, now's not the time, in other words.
No, it is not, I don't think.
Well, with the way they've started this conference final, Kevin, I mean, we thought this series was kind of a toss-up, and last night, it did go down to the wire where Tampa Bay literally scoring in the final minute of the game to win it. There was a bizarre quote from Barry Trotz after the game last night where he said he thought the series was in the process of flipping. Is he just trying to, sell the company line and keep his team positive, or do you see signs that the Islanders can come back here?
Well, I mean, I think Barry's practicing amateur psychology without a license. I think he's just trying to remind his team that, when they play at their best, they could certainly play with Tampa Bay. They showed that last night. But, what we've seen from the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I think fans are starting to sort of catch on with this, is that this is not the same team that lost to the Columbus Blue Jackets in 4 straight a year ago. And, they've developed a mental toughness to go with the changes to their on-ice product as well. And it's pretty clear that they've kind of gone to school with all that's happened to them over the last couple or 3 seasons. And I think they've learned from that. And, like last night was a perfect example of that. It sure looked like the game was going into overtime. And yet, Tampa Bay just never quit. And when they got an opportunity late, they took advantage of it. And, they have so many different weapons. And now with the players that they've added, even subtle changes like Patrick Maroon, who's not going to help them in the regular season, but in the postseason, a player like him can really add some value to the lineup. I think, everybody can see that, they're a team capable of winning it all, regardless of who they face from the other side.
The one thing I've noticed about the Lightning that maybe people might be surprised with that, Sascha, is the fact that, they're scoring a bunch of goals a lot of nights. They had 8 in the opener of this series. They had 7 in one game against Boston. But most nights they're only giving up 1 or 2. And it's hard enough to beat any team when you're only getting 1 or 2 goals. But when you got a team with the explosiveness of Tampa Bay and they're only giving you 1 or 2, it seems like that's just an impossible task.
Yeah, I think that's been a bit of a sea change culturally for the Lightning, in particular with sort of let's call them their bottom 9 forwards. They're playing a much more defensively sound, defensively oriented, defensively responsible style of game, particularly in the playoffs. They lost a guy like JT Miller, who is a dynamic offensive player and did wonders for the Canucks. But when you replace him with someone who is more sort of defensive minded, it leads to a different style of team, and it's not necessarily a better team, but it's certainly one that seems to be having more playoff success at this point.
And I'm going to say too that their best defender is still Vasilevsky. He is such a dominant performer at his, position. And even on his average night, he's still a tremendous help in trying to keep the score down. And I just think in terms of the tools of the game, I just don't see any goalie in the league, including Carey Price, who's any better than he is in terms of, being the type of guy that can be a difference in any game or any series.
When you look at that, Sasha, I mean, you look at the other three teams that are left, they've all used multiple goalies. Dallas certainly not by choice. Ben Bishop was injured, but the Islanders have alternated between Greiss and Varlamov. We've seen Lehner and Fleury for Vegas, but in Tampa Bay it's going to be Vasilevsky. And if you're betting on a team, does that certainty help make choice easier for you?
It cuts both ways for me because the games in the bubble are so tightly packed that you're seeing a lot of goalies suffer from fatigue. So if Vasilevsky is going every single night, that absolutely could lead to him getting pretty tired and then his performance dropping ever so slightly. But at the same point in time, they're up 2-0 on the Islanders. If they can finish this series off relatively quickly and Vasilevsky can get some rest, then that's the other side of the coin. I would feel tremendously confident having Vasilevsky as my rested goalie heading into the Stanley Cup Finals.
What about you, Kevin? Do you think having one goalie that you can count on? I mean, that's kind of been the historical path to the Stanley Cup is you ride the hot goalie. And, the other teams, I almost wonder, did Pete DeBoer overthink game one against Dallas when he switched from Lehner, a guy who had 3 shutouts in the previous series? I mean, I think that's got to be unprecedented that you get 3 shutouts in a playoff series and you get benched for game one of the next round.
Well, you know where I'm going with this. I'm more traditionalist on this, and I really believe this. All this concern about back-to-back games is almost self-fulfilling. A young guy like Vasilevsky, who's just entering the prime, he's a horse. Saddle him up, and I think that for most of the goalies, like I didn't like. I understand. Why Fleury is deserving of a start. He's their guy. He's the face of their franchise. He got him to the Stanley Cup final. Like, all that makes perfect sense to me. But if I'm trying just to win on the basis of winning, I don't take Lehner out. Unless I look at him. And, we saw that in the Vancouver series when Markstrom did look fatigued. But, I didn't see that in Lehner. He was going well. So, I don't necessarily like it. I think there are times when if you're on top of the, what's happening with your team, there are times when you can feel it, you can read it, that the goalie needs a break. But there's no travel here. Guys are more bored than fatigued. And I would continue with the long-standing NHL tradition of who's ever playing well, go with them, ride the hot goalie. So, there are times when I think of what makes sense, but I don't see it very often. I think they're overthinking it a little bit.
Certainly depends on how much rubber you're facing. You talk about the difference between Markstrom and Lehner in that series. Markstrom was facing 30, 40 shots a night, and 40 more were being blocked. Lehner at the other end was having considerably easier nights.
And you look at the Dallas goaltending situation. Obviously, they went to Hudobin when Ben Bishop couldn't go because of injury, or unfit to play, as they like to call it in this playoffs year. But should we put any more stock in Game 2 when they decided to give him a period off and play Jake Ottinger for the third period of Game 2? Is Hudobin running out of gas, or was that just kind of a, sit down and kind of a mental health thing, refresh your brain and get ready for Game 3? Should we read more into that than we are, Sasha?
I don't think so. I think it was a relatively smart thing to do. The chances of coming back from 3-0 against the Golden Knights at this point in time, a team that's given up 1 goal in his last 3 games, were extremely low. So giving him a period of rest, I think was the right thing to do. And I don't think that there's there's certainly no goaltending controversy. I don't think you should worry about him being injured because it makes sense sort of philosophically, even if he was completely healthy.
We're going to talk about the Stanley Cup tracker that you can check in on at sportsbettingdime.com. And as always, the Hockey Debates podcast is brought to you by sportsbettingdime.com, your leading source for odds, sports news, and game predictions. If you're looking to see who's the favorite to win the Stanley Cup, the Hart Trophy, or who's going to win a specific, we'll be talking about some of their Stanley Cup odds right now, and we'll also leave you a link in the description of this episode so you can check out the odds yourself. Now, if you're liking long shots right now, the Islanders plus 2,600. You have to be just out of your mind to bet on the Islanders right now, Kevin, or do you look at their whole body of work in these playoffs and think, yeah, maybe they still got a shot?
Well, I think out of their mind is a bit much because the Islanders play that kind of style that wins in the postseason, and they're just trying to use it against a team that is on the top of their game right now and really feeling confident about the way they're playing. But historically, coming back from 0-2 is very, very difficult. It's in the 70 or 80% category of against. Teams that have a 2-0 lead win 70 or 80% of the time. I forget exactly what it is, but it's high. But saying that, you know how this works. You tell your players you're not trying to win 2 games here. You're just trying to win 1. And if it's 2-1, it's a different series. If they win this game, it'll come down to what I always say about NHL playoff series. Game 4 is the most important game because it's almost always the difference between 3-1 and 2-2. So you just got to win this next game. And then game 4, as it always is the most important game in the series. So, if you got a few extra bob, I think the Islanders are a good long shot bet. I mean, they're certainly capable of winning this series. I don't think they will, but I think they've got a shot to be sure.
Well, Sasha, the first 2 rounds, the Islanders took care of not the first 2 rounds, but so far in the playoffs, Florida was a good offensive team with certainly with defensive issues, and Philadelphia was a pretty good offensive team, and the Islanders didn't have much trouble overcoming them. But the old axiom is that defense wins championships. But here, with this series, we've got the Islanders, who were the number 1 defensive team in the NHL last season, against Tampa Bay, who've been the number 1 offensive team in the NHL the last 2 seasons. Is the difference Tampa Bay's offense, or is the difference that Tampa Bay's got the offense and they can also play good defense?
Yeah, I give a lot of credit to the coaching this year. If you put these 2 teams on paper, Tampa Bay is a much stronger team. They have better hockey players. Barry Trotz is a tremendous coach. There's not many people, if any, coaching right now that I would rather have leading my team from the start of, game 1 of the regular season to the end of the playoffs. But I think the systems being implemented in Tampa Bay this year are stronger, are better. They're more prone to have playoff success where there are usually slightly lower scoring games. So I think it's a combination of Tampa Bay just simply being stronger, having players like Nikita Kucherov and Victor Hedman who are absolute game changers. Whereas on the other side, the Matthew Barzals of the world are looking tired, looking small, looking sort of not necessarily overwhelmed, but they're not the game breakers that Tampa Bay has. And when you couple the sheer talent level on a team like the Lightning with very sound defensive and offensive systems, the results are going to be pretty good.
Yeah, and we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, Brock Nelson, who, took that big hit and looked like his head was scrambled eggs there for a while. And, we don't know where he's going to be at. Once you get in that NHL protocol, the likelihood of missing a game, depending, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but you got to factor that in as well. They're not deep enough to sustain the loss of one of their top 3 offensive players.
And then really, Kevin, that's what's been almost, I don't know if the right adjective is amazing, but impressive certainly, that Tampa Bay's played the entire postseason without Steven Stamkos, a guy who won the Rocket Richard Trophy. And, they've had absences in Ryan McDonough, who's clearly their second best all-around defenseman. So, and they haven't missed a beat. I mean, it speaks wonders to their depth that they've been able to miss, 2 guys that would be considered core players and really just keep on winning.
Well, Braden Point is, I think, the new Steven Stamkos. Like he's more of Stamkos than Stamkos has been lately. Like he's been amazing. You know, we always use the word underrated, and I'm always reluctant to use that because usually, fans are sophisticated enough to know who the top players are. But in Braden Point's case, I actually think it fits because I think everybody was well aware that he was a top level player. But I don't think people knew he was as elite as he's shown in this tournament. Like he's had Gretzky-like numbers, and he's made big time plays at big time moments. And I was struck by after one of the games when I believe it was Chris Johnson of Sportsnet asked Victor Hedman, "Is there anything Braden Point can't do?" And he laughed and said, basically, well, no, because he's watched them throughout this playoff. Like he's been a game changer, even just now. And I would have done the same thing. You start naming game changers, and you go to Kucherov and you go to Hedman. Well, we got to go to Braden Point too. Braden Point has just been incredible in this postseason.
It reminds me of that famous Frank Selke quote when he was GM of the Canadiens, and they asked him if there was anything Gordie Howe couldn't do, and he said, "Well, you can't sit on the bench. Other than that, you can do everything else."
I don't think Braden Point can dunk a basketball, but that's not going to come.
Yeah.
Well, going into Game 3, Sascha, we've got Tampa Bay as the minus 150 choice to win Game 3. The Islanders at plus 130. Which way would you be playing this game?
I got to ride with Tampa Bay, even at the short money right now. I wouldn't be surprised if Tampa Bay or if New York came out considerably slower, much more like they did in Game 1 versus Game 2. You saw a very motivated team in Game 2. And with the game so close here, I don't like to factor in motivation and momentum too much when I'm doing my math. But when I'm putting my own money down, that goal with 8 seconds left in a tie game to go down 2-0, it feels like an absolute backbreaker. And as someone who has watched sports for 34 years, it doesn't feel like the type of thing that you just rebound from, especially with the games so close together.
And that's what I would say, Kevin, is that, the Islanders were terrible in Game 1, but then they came out and, shot their best shot in Game 2 and not only lost, but lost in such heartbreaking fashion. Can that plant a seed of doubt in them?
Well, I agree completely that it did. They were thinking they were going to tie this series up. They were going into overtime. They've been an opportunistic team. They've been resilient. They found ways to win. They were all set for that. They were all set up for being an Islanders success story. And then boom, it was gone. And I think it is hard to overcome. And I think you got to, kind of dig deep and pull off one of their better efforts in order to win Game 3. But again, I think the loss of Brock Nelson, if he's not going to play, that's just they don't have enough pieces. They don't have a Kucherov. They don't have a Braden Point. They don't have a Hedman even. They don't have anyone like that, and so they can't afford to lose guys like that. So they're at a disadvantage here, and certainly we know they're capable of it, but I don't see it. I'm with you guys. I'm betting on Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I think if you're listing out the best players in this series, I think you get down to at least the sort of 5th or 6th player before you're putting someone from the Islanders on there, and it's not something I want to get behind at this point. Even with Barry Trotz over there, whose defensive style of play sort of turns every game into a coin flip.
Yeah, it's even hard to give them. I would rate Barry Trotz ahead of John Cooper simply because he's won a cup and everything else. But John Cooper's a terrific coach, and he's a great communicator. I think he connects with his players. He uses, he's funny and he's glib. He's got a lot going on, and I think he gets through to them. And I know, though, people felt like he didn't do a great job last year. But sometimes it's just not the coach's fault. He just didn't have the right players, didn't have the right chemistry. And when they've made the changes here, we've seen what he's been able to do with this group.
Kevin and I are really old, Sascha, so we've watched hockey even more than 34 years. And we remember the Red Wings teams of the 90s, and we often parallel these Lightning to those Red Wings because it kind of had the same highs and lows over the last few years that the Wings endured in the 90s before they finally won. And one of the parallels I really see between the two of them is they've found a lot of really high quality talent in the later rounds of the draft. Everybody talks about the first round of the draft when they go into the draft, but the teams that win consistently are the teams that find guys in the second, third, fourth, and fifth round. And you look down Tampa Bay's roster. Yeah, they've got the lottery type picks like Stamkos and Hedman, and Vasilevsky was a first rounder. But then you go, Point was a third rounder. I think Kucherov was a second rounder. Andre Palat, Alex Killorn. You start going down the list of all the guys they found in later rounds. It just, it speaks to the scouts, the guys who don't get a lot of recognition, but the scouting job they've done over the last few years.
Yeah, I am old enough to remember the 90s Red Wings and their scouting department, their overseas scouting department. European scouting was sort of miles ahead of the competition at that point in time. And I don't know much about the Lightning scouting department at this point, but just based on the players that you're listing off, it feels like they might be a little bit ahead in that department at this point as well.
Yeah, I think the folks in Detroit were hoping that Yzerman would bring some of that Tampa Bay scouting department with him, but they stayed behind. And that was a big win for the Lightning that Yzerman wasn't able to get them to go with him to Detroit.
It's interesting when you look down the list, too, how many of them were part of those Detroit teams in the 90s. Like Jamie Pusher is a big player in their scouting department. Stacey Roos, another guy, unless you're really a hardcore Red Wings fan, you might not remember him, but he was certainly part of those teams and was around for a lot of those glory years. So guys that have seen it work as a player are now making it work as scouts.
Well, the big man in the Lightning scouting department is Al Murray. And, he's just done a really fine job of identifying, as Bob said, the later picks. You got to make hay certainly with the first round picks, but, you build up depth in the second and third round, because if you look at the percentages of landing players that play regularly in the NHL, it's not very high, but the Lightning have beaten the odds to get players in the later rounds who not only are playing regularly, but being our impact players.
Yeah, and I think that their sort of franchise ethos was a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of adapting to the new NHL. You think about a guy like Point, who is generously 5'10", 165 pounds, 15 years ago, probably would not be doing what he's doing because a lot more clutching and grabbing was allowed. It wasn't as fast a game. I think that they started to value speed and skill at a little bit of an earlier date.
It seems like I don't want to say spring because we're not in the spring, but every playoff year, there's always one team that you kind of scratch your head at and say, what are they still doing around? Like why aren't they out of the playoffs yet? I think this year's version of that would be the Dallas Stars. I don't think anybody really had them penciled in as a Final Four team yet. Here they are, and they're 1-1 with Vegas. And is this finally the round where Dallas gets exposed for not really being a primetime player? Or should we be doubting them at this point because they've gotten this far?
Well, that's a great question. I think we'll know after Game 3. If you watched Game 2, you thought, okay, now we're starting to see the real Dallas Stars, because they had trouble scoring goals, and Vegas is a hard team to play against, and Game 2 they started to look rather ordinary, they being the Dallas Stars. So I agree with you that it's a surprise that they're here, but they deserve to be here. They played well enough, but even when they were winning, they were scary wins. They were giving up too many goals, too many chances. They've had some games when they played well, but often even in their wins, you can't play run and gun and expect to win in the postseason. So I think everyone expects the Vegas Golden Knights to win this series, and I think everyone expects them to take charge in Game 3, and I'm among them. I think this is where we start to see that the Vegas Golden Knights are just much better than the Dallas Stars.
We've got Vegas as the -159 favorite going into Game 3. Dallas, you can get it +138. I'm with Kevin. I think Vegas is the bet here. They're the play. I don't think Dallas. I almost wonder, Sasha, was that Colorado series the worst thing that could have happened to Dallas, because they started playing a game that really they don't succeed at in the long run, where you try trading chances and trying to outscore them. There was a massive amount of goals. It looked like a 1980s version of the Stanley Cup in that series. And now you've got a team like Vegas that's a heavy team that's tougher to play against. And did Dallas maybe get out of their comfort zone against Colorado, and now they're going to be punished for it by Vegas?
I don't know if there's going to be any carryover, but I do think that they were extremely lucky to get by Colorado playing the way that they did. I think if Colorado had been fully healthy, that we'd be looking at a Colorado-Vegas Western Conference final, which is what I highly expected from the outset. But this is sort of another situation akin to the Eastern Conference, where I was saying how Tampa Bay just has better players than the Islanders do. And that's true to not necessarily the same extent. But this Vegas team is incredibly deep at all areas. And you've got a Stars team on the other side, which is considerably slower. And they have, yes, some really good young players. Dennis Gurianov, Miro Heiskanen is maybe the best defenseman in this series. But at the same point in time, they do not have the speed. They do not have the depth to keep up with Vegas. And so my pick before the series was Vegas. You could get Vegas to win the series in 6 or fewer games, basically a -1.5 game spread at plus money. And it didn't look great after game 1, but I think that's still something that I would be considering at this point in time. You'd be able to get better odds on it. Because quite frankly, I don't know how Dallas scores enough to win this series. Vegas has given up, as I said, 1 goal in the last 3 games. And that was against Marc-Andre Fleury.
What is interesting about that Vegas team is that while their lineup is full of above average players, they don't have the star power that the Lightning have. They don't have the impact players quite at the same number that the Lightning have. And we've talked before about Hedman and Kucherov and now Braden Point and even Vasilevsky. These are guys that can take over a series when they're at their very best. What Vegas has is just a bunch of A- players. Like, they're really good, but they're not superstars. I mean, even Mark Stone, who I love, and I think he's perfect for the postseason. And I think, but he's not he can control a series, but not the same way those 4 players that I mentioned for the Lightning are. So they're a real kind of interesting team. They're just really good at all positions, all areas of the game. And, they're built, maybe, they're not 1 player or 2 player dependent. They rely on an entire team, but they have a team full of guys who are very, very strong at what they do.
Now, if you're Ron Francis, the GM of the Seattle Kraken, who are going to be coming into the league in 2 years' time, are you the biggest Dallas Stars fan in North America right now? Because if you're building a team from scratch, I don't want to be the team that come in before me to have been to the Stanley Cup final in 2 of their seasons and to have your fans say, well, how come we're in 18th place? They're in the Stanley Cup finals. Have the Vegas Golden Knights set the bar so high that there's nothing the Seattle Kraken will be able to do to satisfy their fan base?
Well, they're going to get a much less generous expansion draft system. Vegas, the system that was put in place for them was the greatest expansion draft in the history of expansion teams in any sport. And I don't think you're not going to see the same thing when Seattle gets their crack at it.
Well, they will, because, who's really learned by that last draft more so than the Seattle can by studying it is the GMs and all the 30 other teams. They're not going to do what they did for the Vegas Golden Knights. Like, I've had conversations with several managers who said, I think most of us now, instead of offering 3 players not to take a certain guy, are going to say, you want that player? Have at him. Take him. So I don't think they're going to get, the kind of offers, they being the Kraken. You love saying that, don't you, Bob? Seattle Kraken. I know I do. But they're not going to get those offers because I think when the smoke cleared, GMs were saying to themselves, what did we do? They gave up too much. And I think they all realize that. So I think this time around, they may get some good players, but they're not going to get, extra first round picks and extra second round picks and, a top prospect not to take this guy and something else. Like, George McPhee just did a remarkable job of accumulating assets. He got more for not taking players than he got from the players he took. The Seattle's just not going to get that because I think GMs have learned by their mistakes of the last expansion draft.
Yeah, I think that they're really starting to see the value of depth over a single player. There aren't that many players in the league that you can take out of a lineup where it will make a discernible difference. And that's true if you look at the odds makers know it as well. You're talking about Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, who is more based on reputation at this point, and not many other players are actually going to swing a money line pregame if they are taken out of the lineup.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about the depth of the Golden Knights because, while we talk about how well Tampa Bay's drafted, Vegas has assembled an impressive level of depth without really having a single player in their lineup that's a homegrown product. It's all guys they got from other organizations. So I think maybe not just Ron Francis, maybe every GM in the NHL is hoping Vegas doesn't get back to the final again this year.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, too, that's that Ron Francis will have difficulty is matching the job that the Vegas Golden Knights did in player assessment. You look at the players that they chose, they pretty much hit on everybody in terms of finding the guys who were either underappreciated, who had upside they hadn't reached, and they identified those players and they've gotten the most out of them, and then they've done a really fine job of trading even after the expansion draft, not just in terms of accumulating assets, but making deals and then bringing in the right players like the Stone acquisition. I just thought that was so important for them. They needed a player like him, and now that you see them in the playoffs, you can see how he makes them just a much better playoff team because of the way he plays. I just have liked all the moves that they've made. And, even getting a guy like Shea Theodore, when Anaheim had him, he was a bit of a turnover machine. Look, he had a lot of talent. And it was like, is he going to get there or isn't he? Like, the players like Theodore, you're never quite sure. Like he was not considered can't miss. He was either going to be a home run or he was going to be a strikeout. Turns out he's a home run, or at least, we think he is now based on the season he had this year. So they did a really, really strong job of identifying the right players to take and getting the guys that were undervalued or underappreciated or were just starting to scratch the surface of their talent.
Well, we're going to have to wait 2 years to find out if Seattle's all they're cracking up to be. But unfortunately for us, we're going to have to wait till Tuesday to talk about more hockey on the hockeydebates.com podcast powered by sportsbettingdime.com because we're out of time. I'm Bob, he's Sasha, and he's Kevin, and we'll all be back with you next Thursday, and Kevin and I will be back on Tuesday with a special guest. Everybody have a great day and watch yourself some playoff hockey.